Hello and welcome to Politics here on France 24. Finally, a breath of fresh air. French President François Hollande took a much-needed break from depressing news at home and jetted to New York to speak for the first time before world leaders at the United Nations General Assembly. With his ratings plunging, his majority showing signs of division, and unemployment skyrocketing, the socialist president was probably relieved to stop answering questions about the sorry state of the French economy and instead lay out his foreign policy priorities. He urged action on Mali and Syria instead of sweating over the fate of the euro and of French workers. As such, this gives everyone an opportunity to find out who is this self-styled normal president and whether there is a Hollande style or maybe even a Hollande doctrine when it comes to foreign policy. With me to discuss François Hollande's foreign policy, we have three experts on the set. Bernard Guetta, who is a journalist and columnist with France Inter Radio and the daily Libération. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
Also on the set, Philippe Gély, who is the editor of the international pages of the daily Le Figaro. Welcome to you too.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Douglas Yates, a professor of political science at the American University of Paris and the author of a recent book called The Scramble for African Oil. So on Tuesday, François Hollande, for the first time, spoke at the United Nations. He insisted on two very urgent crises. He started with Syria and the need to act very quickly.
How many more deaths will we wait for before we act? How can we allow the paralysis of the United Nations to continue? I know one thing for certain. The Syrian regime will never again take its place in the concert of nations. It has no future among us. And this is why I have taken the decision, on behalf of France, to recognize the provisional government, representative of a new Syria, as soon as it's formed.
Before we open the floor, let's hear François Hollande on the second major crisis, the one in the Sahel region, when he talked about the need for an intervention, a military intervention in the region.
The situation created by the occupation of territory in the north of Mali by terrorist groups is intolerable and unacceptable. Not only for Mali, which is being affected by this terrorist threat, but for all of the countries of the region and beyond the region, and all those who could be hit by terrorism one day.
So François Hollande also talked about other issues, about climate change, the need to reform the United Nations Security Council, etc., etc. Bernard Guetta, what do you think of his performance, and especially on those two crises? He used very strong words.
Well, on the substance, there was a real continuity. But this is absolutely normal. There is always a continuity in foreign policy. This is a tradition and a need also. Well, under Hollande, France will be engaged again, indirectly, but engaged in Africa, in a conflict, in a military conflict. But with Sarkozy, it would have been exactly the same thing.
There was actually a war in Libya.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it was the beginning of that story. And on Syria, this is the real continuity. But the problem is that there was no any new ideas about this drama, the Syrian drama. And so, at the end of the day, the speech was quite disappointing, dull on the form and disappointing on the substance. We will speak about that later on, I guess. There is a change in the foreign policy of Hollande, and this is Europe. But on the Middle East, not at all.
You share that assessment?
Yes. A lot of strong words, but very few specifics. A lot of must-dos, but no plan. And on the issue of Syria, it's not really surprising because actually nobody has a plan. Not the US, not Europe, nobody. But at least you would expect someone who wants to be involved in such a crisis to take a plane and go to Moscow and confront Mr. Putin, which President Hollande hasn't done yet. Maybe he will.
Would it be
someday.
a good idea?
Well, I don't know. But if you say this is intolerable, this cannot go on, well, you do something. You just don't just,
He did say something that he already said in a speech a few weeks back, is that France was ready to recognize a government in exile in Syria, and no other country, no other Western country has done so.
Well, you could say, if you want to be positive, you could say this is the continuity with Nicolas Sarkozys policy, because that's exactly what he did in Libya. But the difference here is that we don't know yet what this interim government might be in Syria. You don't know who will be part of it. And I feel it's a bit risky to announce at the UN Tribune that you will recognize it, whatever it is, whatever form it takes, once it's created. So
it was too bold.
I think it was unplanned. I mean, it all feels like,
Improvisation?
A little bit, in my view.
Douglas Yates, what do you make of François Hollande's speech, but also the kind of vision he laid out? Do you see improvisation, not many new things, or do you see something else?
Well, it's funny. On some levels, I think living here in France and looking at this through the lens of France, there could be a lot of disappointment, because I think France would like a leader who is prominent and who people notice. But it's funny, I would call his speech normal. I think he gave a normal speech.
Is this a compliment?
Right. It doesn't offend anyone. There's no outrage at his speech. He managed to give a speech which doesn't, no other leaders are saying this is shocking. And at the same time, he managed to take some fairly radical views, like on the tax on financial transactions or on new sanctions on Iran. And in particular, I think out of all the things he said, the one that matters the most and the one that France is going to act on, because I don't think they can do much with Syria, is Mali. And he had a lot of meetings with Jacob Zuma of South Africa, with Goodluck Jonathan of Nigeria, and with Morsi of Egypt, that is the three regional hegemons, trying to setting the groundwork for what's going to be an African intervention with French support. And that's an area, France's sphere of influence, French Africa, that's an area where France can act. And once again, I think he's trying to do it in a way, and this is really my theme with him, that you would call institutionalism or idealism. And so he says we're going to prepare an African intervention with a UN mandate from the Security Council. And so rather than doing a bold move, which I think would have pleased French audiences more, he's rather setting himself up for an institutional type of behavior. And I think in the end, that's probably the best way to navigate for France right now in the world.
Bernard Guetta, Douglas was alluding to maybe the longing for a strong leader on the world stage by the French, because they see the United Nations maybe as a preserve of French power, because they have a permanent seat at the Security Council. And so do you think that maybe Nicolas Sarkozy or previous presidents were at least projecting a more presidential image than François Hollande did?
No, I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't say so, but I'm deeply sad that the new president is not more proactive and more eloquent on foreign policy than Sarkozy was or Chirac was. And but I would agree with you. He's very careful on Africa specifically. Is rightly so, certainly. And he managed to organize this intervention, because there will be an intervention in Mali, in North Mali, quite smartly. He was very patient, very convincing with each of the African leaders, including the Nigerian one, and including the Organization of African Unity as a whole. And so well done. And it's carefully prepared, military speaking, because France, of course, will be organizing everything if its men, its troops, are not intervening directly in the conflict. So our country will be very important in that story, and I'm quite optimistic about this topic. About Syria, well, you're right, and you were right. He cannot do anything, and nor Obama. But in such a situation, we tend to expect, and not only we, the French, but the world, we tend to expect our leaders to be a little bit more, actually much more clear in their explanation of a situation. Well, maybe we cannot do nothing. I tend to disagree with that. But maybe, yes, I accept the proposition. But even in this case, and specifically in this case, our leaders, both Obama and Hollande, should be much more eloquent and clear on the contradiction and difficulties of the situation. You cannot say only, this is a shame, this is an awful situation, but we won't do anything. That's a shame also.
Yeah, I agree on that. I think foreign policy is a lot about explanation, about explaining what you can do, what you cannot do, and why. And it's true on Syria. I think it's also true on Mali. And although, I mean, Mali is a very interesting example from a French point of view, because clearly we're going to be on the lead, even if it is leadership from behind. But there is all this framework of, you know, training an African force, going in only with a green light from the UN Security Council and so on. But I think the French public deserve a little more than that. And maybe that's the issue on which President Hollande should start to build a doctrine, especially also because we have hostages there. I still wait for an explanation.
Hostages.
Exactly, we have 6 hostages there. I'm still expecting an explanation of how do you deal with the terrorists there, militarily speaking and politically speaking, with the countries in the region and so on, and how do you do that while trying to save those hostages, trying to rescue them, trying to avoid having them killed. And there might be a space for, you know, starting to build a doctrine, a foreign policy doctrine for this president, I think.
Do you agree, Douglas? This is very early on. Until very recently, there was no real consensus about sending such a force in Mali. Do you think that François Hollande, if things move, will start preparing the French public for a war in which France will be involved, albeit indirectly?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that he had to do first was get the Americans interested, because there seemed to be a large indifference with the American allies of what was happening in the Sahel until an American ambassador was killed in Libya. And at that moment, they became aware, okay, now this affects us. And I think he's gotten the green light. I mean, it's difficult to say there is no literal green light, but I think he's gotten the green light to do what they used to do during the Cold War, when this was understood as France's sphere of influence, and they were supposed to sort of provide security. And Hollande has indicated he's going to do everything according to the rules, work through ECOWAS, which has already been arranged. 3,300 troops are already being arranged to enter into the country, get a UN mandate. And that means that François Hollande has to be soft with Russia and China. He can't be talking tough to them about Syria if he hopes to have them step back, particularly Russia, and allow another intervention in Mali. And politics, the nasty thing is it's always a question of trading, quid pro quo. Also, one last thing. Oh, well, go ahead, please.
No, I would disagree on that point. I would say that in any case, Russia and Putin specifically will support this intervention in Mali because he is deeply, strongly against Islamism. and those groups, Al-Qaeda and so on, or AQMI. Excuse me?
Sunni Islam.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. So the support from Putin for the Mali, for the African operation, it's not a problem.
I agree.
It's given.
As long as he doesn't offend them. But if he decides to suddenly take away Russia's only naval base in the Mediterranean, or start threatening Russia's kind of one strategic ally in the region, then Russia could simply do a quid pro quo and say, well, we'd like to keep you from doing what you normally do, which is intervene in your précaré, in your reserved sphere of influence in Africa.
Right. Just very quickly, do you think Hollande is someone who's good at building relationship? It's his first time on the world stage. He doesn't know that many world leaders except the European ones whom he's met many more times than he wishes, maybe. But
he's very quiet, easy to understand, predictable, and the other leaders like that. On those points, is the exact opposite of Sarkozy. And the other leaders didn't like Sarkozy, not so much, at least because he was unpredictable, very difficult to manage.
Okay, we'll talk about the differences between Nicolas Sarkozy and François Hollande and their respective foreign policy in part 2 of Politics. Stay tuned here on France 24.